The run that UGA recruiting, the University of Georgia, is currently on is insane. And I think it all starts with Kirby Smart. We'll dive in right here on the 5-Star Flex. Welcome to the 5-Star Flex, where being a 5-star isn't just a ranking, it's a mentality. I'm your host, Phillip Dukes, aka Dukes D Scoop. Check me out on Twitter and Instagram at Dukes D Scoop. And make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. UGA has been dominating, absolutely dominating recruiting for the past few years. And I, for one, think it has a lot to do with the man at the top, Kirby Smart. In this video, what we'll do, we're going to break down why, in my opinion, Kirby Smart has been so successful as the head man at the University of Georgia. There are a lot of guys who came before him that were successful. Mark Richt always picked blue chip guys, but there's never been a way for UGA to recruit at the clip that they are recruiting at now. I grew up in College Park, Georgia. I've been a fan of UGA my whole life. Now, I ended up going to Auburn, but the hometown team outside of Tech was UGA. We're talking about Garrison Hurston, Eric Zier. We're talking about Hines Ward. We're talking about Bryce Hunter. We're talking about guys on guys that have been legends in UGA's history. But there was never anything like what's going on currently when it comes to recruiting at UGA. University of Georgia is the top dog in recruiting right now, and Kirby Smart is the guy. The first reason I think Kirby Smart has been so successful recruiting at Georgia is his personality. You can tell that there's a certain pride that exudes himself when he says, I am the head coach at University of Georgia. There absolutely is. When Kirby is able to talk to high school coaches, and I say Kirby, and it's not a disrespectful thing, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to say Kirby, because in Georgia, when you talk to high school coaches, when you talk to parents of players, they say Coach Smart in the media, but there's a sense of camaraderie that Kirby Smart is able to give people where they feel comfortable when they're having conversations about him. They call him Kirby. It's like a term of endearment, and it's part of his personality. When Kirby Smart talks to coaches, he's the type of guy that makes you feel like, hey, you know what? You could be me one day. He's the type of guy when he goes into these high schools and he's making his visits, he's recruiting not only the players, but he's also recruiting the coaches and the people at the school. So when he comes around, they're going to welcome him with open arms. You never know who will be the next 5-star. And Kirby Smart treats people like he may have a son one day that's a 5-star. This lady, who's the cafeteria lady, may have a nephew that's a 5-star one day, or not even a 5-star, just a great football player. And he wants every interaction to be meaningful. So when you look at Kirby Smart at some of these games, like look at the state championship in Georgia, when you pan to the sideline, you see Kirby Smart not just talking to other coaches on a college level. Sometimes he's talking to high school coaches. Sometimes he's talking to members of the media. Kirby Smart's he's spoken to me. Like, this is not anything I'm making up. So when it comes to personality and how he leads and how he treats people, I think that's one of the biggest factors in why Georgia has been so successful recruiting. Now, secondly, one thing that sets Kirby Smart apart from a lot of his counterparts when it comes to recruiting is his preparation and his utility of the tools that he has around him. What do you mean, Dukes? I was privy to, before I got in the media, I was privy to some conversations that Kirby Smart was having with some guys who were really close to me. And I'm listening. And Kirby Smart would always set Kirby apart was his numbers, was the data analysis, it's the facts that he was coming with. He was able to spew out facts at a rate that was insane. You would have thought he was a walking almanac. I mean, just talking about the development, he's talking about the guys who had been in the position that ended up at Georgia that he had touched, that he was able to say, hey, you know, this is one of my guys, and he profiled so similarly to you. And even when I was at Alabama, when I had guys with this same profile, this is how they perform. This is how they performed in certain situations. So when you talk about development and how you're able to tangibly prove that coming to be coached by me is going to work out better for you than being coached by someone else. He always backs it up with data. He backs it up with fact. And I think that preparation is key when it comes to landing some of these really, really highly rated recruits. When you also talk about preparation, I talked about Kirby's personality. That personality helps him because he's able, when he's after one of these top recruits, he's not just recruiting the recruit. He's not just recruiting their parents. He's recruiting the whole ecosystem around that guy. And that's important because he's prepared. He may walk into that he may meet that player's favorite teacher and have a fact about that teacher. Oh, so you're a Georgia Tech grad. Oh, something like that, just to josh around with him. But those things, when Kirby Smart is able to say, hey, I remember you. Oh, I know you. Hey, I learned about you. I heard about you. I've heard so much about you. Those things endear you to people in certain communities. Not certain communities, any community. That's what you have to have. We all talk about the recruiting and the celebrity of Deion Sanders. I love Deion. 2 chains on right now, and they both ropes, just like Deion wears. But, and this is no comparative factor, but it's just facts. Kirby has a certain level of cultural awareness that may not be on the same level of Deion Sanders, but it doesn't have to be because he's not Deion. He's Kirby Smart. So Kirby Smart being able to understand the lay of the land when it comes to recruit these guys by being prepared, asking the right questions, wanting to know who the decision makers are in this guy's recruitment, knowing about the high school coach, knowing about the offense, how their offense and defense is being ran, and how it fits similarly to what Georgia is doing. And if it's different, how do you take those skill sets of this player and fit them into what Georgia likes to do and let it be known that if you are to become a Bulldog, these are the ways you'll be utilized. And that takes hours of preparation to do that, because you got to think, if you're recruiting, if you sign a class of 25, you have to get information on 150. And when you finally identify those top guys that you're going to allow to commit, then out of that, you get down to about 75 guys that are absolute takes. And then from that point, you go get your 25 guys out of that whole bunch. That's a lot of information. That's a lot of parents to know. That's a lot of uncles. That's a lot of trainers to know. That's a lot of teachers to know. That's a lot of high school coaches to know. So I think his level of preparation is something that sets him apart. And as long as he continues to prepare at that same rate, he's going to continue to be successful. Now, here's something about Kirby Smart that I think is very, very unique, and that's his pressure gauge. This is my third part. His pressure gauge of when to turn it up and when to turn it down is phenomenal. We all hear the leaked audio of Kirby Smart just going off, cursing, whatever it takes, getting on guys, firing them up. And we've seen Kirby blow a gasket on the sideline when it comes to chewing a player out when they've done something wrong. That's when he's ramping up the temperature on the gauge. He's turning up the pressure. That's when he ramps it up. But you'll see this same coach on the sideline hugging a guy. You'll see him at practice after he's already cursed people out and done what he's had to do to get his point across. He'll still come back and circle back and say, you know, as long as that guy is receptive enough to receive it, you'll see Kirby kind of follow up from that sometimes it's just a tongue lashing. And it's a part of football, and it's a part of championship football. But you'll see Kirby knows when to get on the guy and when to kind of ease up on the guy. And I think that's really important because a lot of guys only have one speed. If you're wrong, you're wrong, and I'm going to tell you you're wrong every time. And I think Kirby learned a lot of this from Coach Saban. We all know that Coach Saban is not afraid to tell a player how he feels, or a coach for that example. But some of those press conferences where Coach Saban has spoken about players in a glowing light, you think about Bryce Young, the Bryce Young and I believe it was Will Anderson interview where things didn't go their way, but Coach Saban really just kind of showed those guys the type of love that uh, when you think about how big personalities are and how huge the name Saban and Smart ring out in the Southeast, to see these guys be able to show some vulnerability and show love to players and not just be talking about championships and talk about personal situations and being able to humanize themselves and not these deities of coaches, I think is what sets them apart. And I think is what's made Georgia really successful is by Kirby being able to be that tyrant type guy, the guy who's going to have the smoke coming out of his ears and the lasers coming out of his eyes, but also being able to be the guy who's going to put his arm around you. And you're going to hear me say that term and that phrase as long as I'm talking about recruiting, because it's so apropos for what has to happen with 16, 17, and 18-year-old guys. When you start recruiting a guy at 16 years old, they're not even finished with puberty in some cases. Hormones are all over the place. So being able to talk to a guy that you're recruiting and, ask him how he's feeling and, hey, man, you had a bad game, but, you'll bounce back. Taking the time to find out about these players and knowing when to push them and when not to, that pressure gauge is very special in Kirby Smart's mind, his heart. And I think that's one of the things that's made him very successful recruiting, understanding how to use the pressure gauge. All right. This is probably the biggest one. But Kirby Smart's development, the development since guys have been at UGA, the return on investment on giving him your 5-star pledge, your 4-star pledge, that ROI, being able to tell a player in the year 2022, games that you saw recently, not 10 years ago, not 15 years ago, a game that you watched as a recruit from that season. We put 5 defensive players in the NFL draft just on defense. Think about that. 5 defensive players in a 32-team draft. That's nearly 1/6 of the first round of the NFL draft came from nearly 1/2 of an 11-man defense. Wow. You got 11 starters. 5 of them. 5 of 11 are drafted in the first round. How much more development do you need when you talk about the likes of Trayvon Walker? You talk about, and then in that same draft, probably one of your more highly rated guys, Nakobe Dean, was there, and he didn't go to the 3rd round. That's 6 guys. When you just go down to total numbers, it gets insane. This year, you're going to put a tight end, probably the best tight end in college history, depending on who you ask, but I'll just say one of the greatest tight ends, just for the sake of argument. You've got first rounders on offense. You got first rounders on defense. The offensive line consistently put out first rounders. George Pickens probably should have been a first rounder based on talent. When you talk about getting the most out of your guys, there is a consistent ideology around the league that practices at the University of Georgia are way harder than some NFL practices. I'm not going to say all of them, but a lot of guys said they got more work at UGA. Rookies said they got more work at UGA in practice than they did in the NFL. So by the time they got to the NFL, they were able to adjust to the pace quicker. That's development. Having guys prepared. Talk about a guy like Glenn Schumann, who turned down the Philadelphia Eagles to come back to the University of Georgia. When you talk about Shu, as he's called so lovingly, Kirby lets Shu do his thing. He allows him to do it. And Shu is one of the brightest minds defensively. And they say, oh, it's just because Georgia has all 4 and 5 stars. Being able to control all of that talent, harness it, and display it in a championship format is still a very tough job to do. So the development that Kirby has done, not just on with the players, but bringing up a guy like Schumann or developing or rehabilitating guys. You talk about Mike Bobo, who didn't have the best year at Auburn before he came to Georgia, but Kirby was able to put him in a situation to be successful after he lost Munkin. After he lost Munkin, he was able to backfill with a guy like Bobo, who he allowed to be there for a year and then step into that role. So when you talk about development, there isn't a better place in the country than Georgia. And there may be somewhere comparable, but Kirby Smart does a great job of developing his players, coaching them hard early, and setting the practice tones in such a fashion that guys are prepared for the NFL soon as they get there. They're ready. All right. That's my 4-part series on why Kirby Smart has been successful. I think going forward, we're going to talk more about the coaching staff and that he's put together. Definitely want to talk about the off-field staff when you talk about guys like David Cooper and Jonas Jennings, the guys who hold that together. But those 4 points, in my opinion, from the 5-star flex are why Georgia, and specifically Kirby Smart, has been at the top of the recruiting rankings for year after year after year. All right, I'm your host, Phillip Duke, signing out. Much love.